The ambulance was at my gate for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I know the exact duration because the gate camera logged the timestamp when the unit arrived and when it cleared. 4 minutes and 17 seconds between the moment the paramedics reached the keypad and the moment Karen Whitfield stepped away from the gate mechanism and let the vehicle through. 4 minutes and 17 seconds, during which my daughter Isabel was in the back of that ambulance in anaphylactic shock, with a blood pressure that the lead paramedic later described in his incident report as critically low and declining. Karen had positioned herself at the gate because she believed the ambulance was responding to a false alarm. She had told the first paramedic who spoke with her that the HOA had been having issues with residents misusing emergency services and that she wanted to verify the call before allowing access. She was the chair of the HOA's Community Safety Committee. She had a clipboard. She was standing between my daughter and the hospital, with a clipboard conducting a verification process of her own design at 6:43 on a Thursday evening in September. The moment she let the ambulance through was not the moment she finished her verification process. The moment she let the ambulance through was the moment the second paramedic, who had stepped out of the passenger side to address the delay directly, said 4 words to Karen that changed the arithmetic of the situation. He said, "The patient is Isabel." Not Isabel Rowe, just Isabel, because Marcus Webb, the paramedic, had grown up 3 streets from my family, had known Isabel since she was 7 years old, and had used her first name because that was how you referred to someone you knew. Karen Whitfield knew exactly one Isabel in Clearwater Ridge. She stepped away from the gate. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. That was the number I was thinking about when Isabel was stabilized in the ER at 11:42 that night, when the attending physician told me her epinephrine levels had been adequate to arrest the reaction and that we had reached the hospital in time. When Renata, my wife, sat in the waiting room chair with her hands in her lap and her eyes closed, and the specific stillness of a woman who has been holding herself together for 5 hours and is beginning to be able to stop. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. What I did with that number in the 6 months that followed, what the gate camera footage produced, what the paramedics' incident report contained, what the State Emergency Medical Services Oversight Board determined, what the HOA's insurance carrier discovered, what the Clearwater Ridge community ultimately understood about the person who had been chairing its safety committee, none of that was about Karen Whitfield. It was about what 4 minutes and 17 seconds means when someone is in anaphylactic shock. It was about what it means when a person with a clipboard decides she has the authority to verify an emergency. And it was about what happens when that person makes that decision in front of a gate camera that records everything. My name is Gerald Osei, 51 years old, 22 years as a licensed civil engineer. For the last 8 years, also the mayor of Clearwater Ridge, a position I hold because my neighbors ask me to and because I believe that the infrastructure of a community matters and that someone who understands infrastructure should be involved in managing it. My wife Renata is an emergency medicine physician. She has spent 19 years treating patients in crisis, people who arrived at the emergency department in the specific window between living and not, and whose outcomes depended on what happened in the minutes before they arrived as much as what happened after. She understands, with the professional precision of someone who has lived the consequences of delayed care across hundreds of cases, what 4 minutes and 17 seconds means. Isabel was 17. She had a known peanut allergy, severe anaphylactic, the kind that we had managed carefully for 12 years with epinephrine autoinjectors, medical alert identification, school protocols, and the constant, organized vigilance of parents who understood the risk and refused to become complacent about it. She had used her autoinjector at 6:31 that evening, 14 minutes before the ambulance reached our gate. She had called 911 at 6:32. She had called Renata at 6:33. Renata was 20 minutes away at a dinner with colleagues, had turned around immediately and reached the hospital 12 minutes after the ambulance. The autoinjector had slowed the reaction. It had not stopped it. Anaphylaxis, when it progresses past a certain threshold, requires epinephrine administration and airway management that a home autoinjector cannot provide. The clinical window, the period during which intervention remains adequate, is not infinite and is not predictable with precision, and Renata had known this for 19 years and had known it about her own daughter since the day Isabel was diagnosed. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Karen Whitfield had lived in Clearwater Ridge for 3 years. She was 53, former corporate communications director, now a lifestyle brand consultant who described her primary occupation as community stewardship. She had joined the HOA's Community Safety Committee in her first month of residence and had become its chair 11 months later through a combination of organizational energy and the specific talent for making herself indispensable to institutional structures that her communications background had developed. The Community Safety Committee had, under Karen's chairship, developed a gate access protocol. Clearwater Ridge had a single vehicular entrance with a keypad gate, a standard security feature for the community. The original protocol permitted emergency vehicles access through a Knox box, a secure key storage system that emergency services used to access gated communities without delay. Karen's protocol had added a secondary verification step, not instead of the Knox box, in addition to it, for situations where the Knox box was unavailable or malfunctioning. The secondary step involved a safety committee representative confirming the nature of the emergency before granting manual gate override. The Knox box had been malfunctioning for 11 days when Isabel went into anaphylactic shock. The malfunction had been reported to the board. It had not been repaired. Karen knew about the malfunction. She was the chair of the safety committee. She had positioned herself at the gate that Thursday evening for reasons I did not fully understand until 3 weeks later, when I reviewed the complete documentation and understood the sequence. The board had been discussing the Knox box repair at its most recent meeting, a meeting Karen had attended and at which she had argued for a more comprehensive security review before the Knox box was simply repaired, because she had concerns about the existing emergency access protocol. The board had tabled the discussion pending her review. In the interim, the Knox box was inoperative, and Karen had made herself available as the manual override verification authority. She had been at the gate every evening for 11 days. She had been waiting for an opportunity to demonstrate the value of her verification process. On the evening of September the 14th, at 6:43, that opportunity arrived in the form of an ambulance containing my daughter. I was in my home office when Isabel called Renata. Renata reached me on her way back to the house. I reached the ambulance in our driveway at 6:38, helped the paramedics stabilize Isabel for transport, and was in the passenger seat of my own car following the ambulance at 6:41. I did not know about the delay at the gate until 9:15 that evening, when Marcus Webb called me from the hospital parking lot and told me what had happened. He told me about Karen, about the clipboard, about the 4 minutes and 17 seconds, about the moment he said Isabel's name and Karen stepped back. He told me in the specific, carefully controlled tone of a paramedic who has been trained not to express in real time what he is feeling about a situation, because real time is when you need your training, not your feelings, and who is now, 2.5 hours later in a parking lot, at the point where the feelings have somewhere to go. He said, "Gerald, I need to tell you this because it's going in my incident report and you should know before you read it there." I said, "Tell me." He told me. I was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then I said, "Is Isabel stable?" He said yes, the attending had told him before he left. I said, "Thank you for getting her here." He said, "I'm sorry it took as long as it did." I said, "That wasn't your failure." He said, "No, it wasn't." I went back inside the hospital. sat beside Renata in the waiting room. Did not tell her yet, she was in the specific focused calm of a physician who has directed her training at her own child's situation and was holding that focus with everything she had. I waited until Isabel was in a room, stable, the attending's assessment complete, and his prognosis delivered. Until Renata had spoken with the attending herself in the language of emergency medicine colleagues and had confirmed what she needed to confirm. Then I told her, Renata is not a person who shows what she is feeling in the way that most people show what they are feeling. 19 years of emergency medicine has given her a profound and genuine ability to separate the immediate experience from the registered response, because emergency medicine requires you to keep functioning through both. She sat with what I told her for approximately 30 seconds. Then she said, "Get the camera footage tonight." "Not tomorrow, tonight." "The gate camera logs in real time to the HOA's cloud server," she said. "The board has access. So do you, as mayor, pull it tonight before any administrative process creates an opportunity for it to disappear." I am the mayor of Clearwater Ridge. I am also an HOA member. I had access to the gate camera system through both roles. I pulled the footage from the hospital waiting room on my phone at 10:47 that evening. I downloaded it to my personal cloud storage. I sent a copy to Leonard, our attorney, with a message that said only, "Do not delete anything. We'll explain tomorrow." He replied at 11:03, "Footage secured on my end as well. Call when you can." Isabel was discharged Friday afternoon. She was home Friday evening. She was tired and somewhat shaken. Anaphylaxis is physically taxing, and the experience of it, for someone who has managed the allergy carefully for 12 years, is not routine even when the outcome is good. Renata sat with her Friday night. I sat in my home office and reviewed the footage. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The camera angle was clear. Ambulance arrival, the paramedics' initial approach to the Knox box, the realization that the Knox box was inoperative, the approach to the gate mechanism, Karen at the gate mechanism with her clipboard, the conversation audible, the camera had audio, in which Karen explained the verification protocol to Marcus. Marcus's statement that this was a genuine emergency requiring immediate access. Karen's response that the protocol required confirmation. The second paramedic's exit from the vehicle. His statement of 4 words, Karen's immediate step back from the gate. The audio was clear throughout. I watched it twice, then I sent it to Renata. She watched it and called me from the living room where she was sitting with Isabel. She said, in the careful voice she used when she was managing something large in a contained way, "I want to see the incident report when it's filed." Marcus said it would be in the system Monday, I said. "What are we doing?" she said, not as a question that needed answering that night, as a question that needed to be acknowledged. "Everything," I said. "We are doing everything available to us." She was quiet for a moment. "Good," she said, and went back to sitting with Isabel. I spent Saturday building the documentation package, not because I needed to build a case. The case was built. It had built itself in 4 minutes and 17 seconds of time-stamped footage with clear audio. I built the documentation because documentation is how I approach every problem and because every piece of it would be needed in the processes that were coming. The gate camera footage, the paramedics' incident report, which Marcus sent me Monday morning with a note that said he had filed it with complete accuracy and had not softened anything. The Knox box malfunction report, which had been submitted to the board 11 days before the incident and which I obtained from the HOA's administrative records in my capacity as mayor. The board meeting minutes from 3 weeks prior showing Karen's argument for a comprehensive security review and her position as the de facto manual override authority during the Knox box malfunction. The timeline that these documents produced, assembled together, told a complete story. Karen had known the Knox box was inoperative. She had argued against immediate repair. She had positioned herself as the manual override authority. She had been at the gate every evening for 11 days. and when an ambulance arrived for a genuine emergency, she had conducted her verification process for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The question of what she had intended, whether she had genuinely believed this was a false alarm, whether she had been acting from procedure rather than judgment, whether the verification process was a policy she had built in good faith that had failed catastrophically in application. Those questions were relevant to what kind of person Karen was. They were not relevant to what she had done or what its consequences might have been. Renata said this to me Saturday evening when I shared the complete documentation. She said, "Intent doesn't change the outcome. If Isabel had died in that ambulance, Karen's intent would not have changed what caused the delay." "No," I said. "Intent is relevant to punishment," she said. "Outcome is relevant to consequence." "Yes. What consequences are available?" I had been thinking about this systematically. "Several tracks," I said. "The State EMS Oversight Board has jurisdiction over incidents involving delayed emergency vehicle access. The HOA has governance responsibility for the gate protocol and Karen's role in it. There's potential civil liability for the HOA and potentially for Karen personally. And there's the community, the people who live here and who need to understand what happened at their gate." "All of them," Renata said. "All of them," I agreed. I filed the complaint with the Colorado Emergency Medical Services Division on Monday. The complaint described the incident, identified Karen Whitfield as the individual who had delayed access, and attached the complete documentation package, including the footage. The EMS division had authority to investigate delays in emergency vehicle access and to refer findings to the appropriate oversight bodies. Leonard filed a formal notice of claim against the HOA on Tuesday, a required precursor to civil litigation in Colorado, giving the HOA 60 days to respond before suit could be filed. The notice described the delay, the inoperative Knox box, the board's knowledge of the malfunction, and Karen's self-appointed role as manual override authority. The HOA board called an emergency session Tuesday evening. I was not on the board. The mayor of Clearwater Ridge sits ex officio on the board but does not have a vote, but I was present. The board president, a retired teacher named Patricia Sims, who had the organized calm of someone accustomed to managing rooms full of people with competing needs, ran the meeting with complete control. Karen was present. She had been notified of the legal notice and had arrived with an attorney, a Denver civil litigator, whose name I recognized from property disputes Leonard had handled. She sat with the specific composure of a person who has been briefed on a serious situation and is managing their presentation carefully. Patricia asked Karen to describe what had happened at the gate on September 14th. Karen described it in the professional language of a former communications director, organized, measured, framing the verification protocol as a board-authorized procedure implemented in response to documented false alarm incidents and the Knox box malfunction. Patricia asked how many false alarms there had been in the preceding 11 days. Karen said 2. One had been a food delivery vehicle that had represented itself as a medical supply delivery. One had been a landscaping company that had claimed emergency status to gain after-hours access. Patricia asked Karen whether she had distinguished those situations from the arrival of an EMS unit with active lights and sirens. Karen said the protocol applied to all external vehicle access requests during the Knox box malfunction period. Patricia asked whether the protocol had been reviewed and approved by the full board. There was a pause. Karen said the safety committee had authority to implement interim protocols during equipment malfunction periods. Patricia said she did not believe that authority extended to protocols that could delay emergency medical services, and that she did not recall the board approving any such expansion of safety committee authority. Karen's attorney interjected. Patricia acknowledged the interjection and moved on. I spoke when Patricia gave me the floor. I spoke as mayor, not as Isabel's father, because the mayor's perspective was the one that needed to be heard in that room at that moment. I described the incident from the documentation. I described the Knox box malfunction timeline and the board's knowledge of it. I described the consequences of 4 minutes and 17 seconds of delay for a patient in anaphylactic shock. I said the board approved a Knox box system because it understood that emergency vehicle access cannot be subject to verification delays. When that system failed, the appropriate response was repair. The appropriate response was not to replace it with a human verification process that has no medical training, no clinical judgment, and no authority to determine what constitutes a genuine emergency. I looked at Karen when I said this, not with hostility, with the clarity of a mayor describing what had happened in his community. She looked back. She had the specific quality of a person who knows they are in a position from which there is no comfortable exit and is deciding what dignity looks like in that position. The board voted to suspend Karen's chairship of the Safety Committee pending the EMS Division investigation 4-0, to commission an independent review of the gate access protocol 4-0, to expedite the Knox box repair, which was completed the following morning 4-0. Karen's attorney requested that the board's votes be tabled pending the investigation. Patricia declined. The EMS Division investigation took 6 weeks. The investigator, a woman named Sandra Torres, who had 20 years of emergency medical services regulatory experience, reviewed the footage, the incident report, Marcus's testimony, the Knox box malfunction timeline, and the board minutes. Her findings were specific and unambiguous. The delay constituted an obstruction of emergency medical services under Colorado statute. The obstruction had been created by an individual acting without proper authority, implementing a protocol that had not been reviewed or approved by qualified emergency services personnel. The Knox box malfunction had created a vulnerability that the board had not adequately addressed. And Karen Whitfield's position as the manual override authority, self-appointed, in Sandra Torres' assessment without adequate board authorization, had placed a person with no emergency medical training in a position to make decisions with life-or-death consequences. The findings were referred to the Pitkin County District Attorney's Office for assessment of criminal culpability. The DA reviewed them and declined to file criminal charges. The standard of criminal intent was not met by the evidence, but issued a formal public statement that the delay had been reckless and had exposed the community to serious liability. The HOA's insurance carrier, upon receiving the EMS Division findings and the notice of claim, initiated their own review. The review concluded that the HOA had potential liability exposure and that settlement negotiation was the appropriate path. Leonard and the carrier's counsel spent 3 months on that negotiation. The civil settlement was confidential in its specific terms. I can say that it included a comprehensive reform of the gate access protocol, mandatory Knox box maintenance scheduling with an independent verification requirement, a prohibition on any individual other than a qualified emergency services professional having authority over emergency vehicle access, and a community-wide notification of the protocol changes. It also included an amount that was not small and that reflected what the carrier's own actuarial analysis had said about the potential damages if the outcome had been different. Karen resigned from the HOA's safety committee the week the EMS division findings were released. She resigned from the board's communications subcommittee 2 weeks later. She had, by the end of November, removed herself from every formal role she had held in Clearwater Ridge's community governance. She came to our door in December, alone, without her attorney, in the early evening when the December dark had settled over the neighborhood and the house lights were on and Isabel was visible through the front window doing homework at the kitchen table. She stood on our porch. She looked at Isabel through the window for a moment before I opened the door. Then she looked at me. She said she had come because she had needed to come since September and had not known how and had finally understood that there was no version of this that had a right time or a right way, only the decision to do it or not. She said what she had done at the gate had been wrong. Not wrong because the protocol was wrong in principle. She believed, and still believed, that gate access protocols served a purpose. Wrong because she had not understood, had genuinely not understood, what it meant to apply a protocol to an EMS vehicle with active lights and sirens regardless of the stated nature of the emergency. She had been thinking about false alarms, and she had not been thinking about what was inside the vehicle. She said she had been thinking about what was inside the vehicle every day since September 14th. She said she was sorry, in the specific, undefended way that apologies are when they do not include any version of but or because or however. Renata came to the door while Karen was speaking. She stood beside me. She listened to the end. When Karen finished, Renata was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My daughter is alive. I am grateful for that every day, and I will be grateful for it every day for the rest of my life." She paused. "What happened at that gate cannot be taken back. What you did cannot be undone. But you came to this door, and you said what you said without conditions, and I am going to accept it as what it is." She paused again. "I am not going to tell you it's all right. It is not all right, but I accept what you've offered." Karen nodded. She did not say anything else. She turned and walked back across the street. I closed the door. Renata went back to the kitchen. She touched Isabel's shoulder as she passed. Isabel looked up and smiled the specific smile of a 17-year-old who does not know what has just happened on the front porch and does not need to know tonight. Renata made tea. I sat at the table. "Was that right?" I said, meaning, was what she had said to Karen right? Meaning, had she said what she actually felt or what she had managed herself into feeling? She looked at her tea. "I don't know yet," she said, "but it was honest." I nodded. Isabel finished her homework at 9:15 and came to say good night. She was healthy. She was 17. She had her mother's directness and my tendency to document things and the specific quality of a young person who has encountered something serious and has processed it in the way serious things should be processed, not by diminishing it, but by continuing. She said good night. She went upstairs. Renata and I sat at the kitchen table for a while longer. The Knox box on our community gate had been repaired and tested and was operational. The gate access protocol had been reformed, and the reform had been distributed to every household in Clearwater Ridge. The EMS division had published their findings as a case study in their annual review of emergency access incidents, referenced without identifying information, but containing enough specificity that anyone in the regional EMS community would understand what had happened and why. The documentation was complete. The processes had run. The consequences had landed where they were going to land. What remained was the specific and ordinary continuation of a life that had, on a Thursday evening in September, come very close to being permanently different. Isabel went back to school Monday. She carried her epinephrine auto-injector in her backpack and wore her medical alert bracelet and did all the things she had always done because the allergy was managed, and management was what kept it from being catastrophic. The gate opened smoothly on the Knox box when emergency vehicles needed it. The verification clipboard was gone. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. I had not forgotten the number. I was not going to forget the number. But the number existed in a record now, in the EMS division findings, in the HOA's reformed protocol, in the case study that emergency services providers across the region would read, and from which they might prevent 4 minutes and 17 seconds from meaning in someone else's community what it had almost meant in mine. The documentation had done what documentation does. It had made the thing that happened real in a way that outlasted the moment. Isabel was alive and healthy and doing homework at the kitchen table. That was also real. That was the thing that mattered most. Everything else was the record of what had almost been different. And I would keep that record for as long as I kept records, which was going to be a very long time. Framed thumbnail text. 4 minutes 17 seconds. My camera recorded every one of them.